January 21st, 1945. Oflag 64, Subin, Poland. Euro 6 to 15 hours. Captain William Bill Blackwell stood at morning roll call wearing what appeared to be a perfectly regulation German Wehrmacht officer's uniform, field-grade tunic with proper insignia, trousers with the correct piping, even a peaked cap at the regulation angle. The uniform had been constructed entirely from stolen bedsheets, dyed with brick dust and boot polish, with buttons carved from wood and painted to resemble metal. On his feet were boots that 3 days ago had been American issue, but now sported added height and modified soles to look vaguely German. In his pocket was an identity document so expertly forged that it had fooled 2 German guards during a test run yesterday. He was 28 years old, from Baltimore, a former insurance adjuster who'd been captured at the Battle of the Bulge 6 weeks earlier. This morning he planned to walk through the main gate, salute the guards, and simply leave, the most audacious and absurd escape plan in Oflag 64's history. The German commandant had stated during processing, "Gentlemen, this camp has never had a successful escape. Geography, manpower, and German efficiency make it impossible." Bill adjusted his fake uniform, checked his forged papers one final time, and thought, let's test that theory. Oflag 64 was the only German POW camp designated exclusively for captured American officers. Located in Subin, western Poland, it held approximately 1,500 American lieutenants, captains, and majors captured during various European campaigns. By January 1945, the camp's situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Soviet Red Army was advancing from the east at terrifying speed. German guards were increasingly nervous, supplies were erratic, and the camp administration operated in barely controlled chaos. Captain William Blackwell arrived at Oflag 64 on December 28, 1944, part of a large group captured during the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's desperate last offensive that had caught Allied forces off guard in the Ardennes forest. Bill had been a company commander in the 28th Infantry Division. His unit was overrun near Bastogne. After 4 days of evading through frozen forests, exhausted and starving, he'd surrendered to a Wehrmacht patrol. The journey to Oflag 64 had been nightmarish. Cattle cars without heat, minimal food, guards who ranged from professional to sadistic. When Bill finally arrived at the camp, he weighed 168 pounds, down from his normal 195. But unlike many prisoners broken by combat and capture, Bill arrived angry rather than defeated. The anger was clarifying. He would not rot in this camp waiting for liberation that might never come. He would escape. Oflag 64 had a reputation as escape-proof, not because of sophisticated security, but because of geography. It was located 150 miles inside German-held territory, far from any neutral border. Successful escape required not just getting out of the camp, but traversing hostile territory, avoiding patrols, surviving winter weather, and somehow reaching Allied or Soviet lines without being shot. The statistical probability of success was effectively zero. Previous escape attempts from Oflag 64 had been traditional: tunnels, wire cutting, hiding in supply trucks. All had failed. The Germans had adapted their security after each attempt, making conventional escapes progressively harder. What they hadn't anticipated was an escape attempt so brazen, it bordered on psychological warfare, walking out the front gate dressed as a German officer. The idea came to Bill during his 3rd day in camp, watching German officers enter and leave with casual authority while guards snapped to attention. He thought, what if I just looked like I belonged? Would anyone question me? The clash between conventional wisdom and audacious simplicity. Bill pitched his idea to the Camp Escape Committee, a semi-formal organization that coordinated resistance activities, managed contraband, and evaluated escape proposals. The committee was led by Colonel Paul Good, the senior American officer, a career military man who'd been captured in North Africa 2 years earlier. Good listened to Bill's plan with increasing skepticism. "Let me understand this correctly," Good said. "You want to construct a German officer's uniform from bedsheets, walk through the main gate at shift change, and just leave? That's your plan?" "Yes, sir," Bill confirmed. "The guards see dozens of German officers daily, supply officers, administrative staff, visiting inspectors. They don't scrutinize German officers the way they watch us. If the uniform is convincing and I act with enough authority, I think they'll just salute and open the gate." Another committee member objected. "It's insane. One close look and they'll spot the fake uniform. Then you're shot for impersonating a German officer, which violates the Geneva Conventions in ways that even normal escape doesn't. Everything about this war is insane, Bill countered. We're losing men to cold, disease, and starvation while the Germans pretend to run a regulation camp. Conventional escapes fail because Germans expect them. This succeeds precisely because it's too crazy to expect. The argument that won good over was strategic. Sir, the Soviets are maybe 2 weeks away. The Germans might evacuate this camp, or they might just shoot us to prevent liberation. Either way, time is running out. I'd rather die trying to escape than wait passively for whatever the Germans decide to do with us. Good approved the plan with conditions. Bill would need to build a perfect uniform, practice German mannerisms, and have credible forged documents. The camp's craftsmen would help. Tailors who could sew, artists who could forge, actors who could coach German behavior. But Bill would go alone. If it failed, only one man would face consequences. Bill agreed. What he didn't tell the committee was his deeper motivation. He'd promised his wife, Margaret, that he'd survive and come home. Passive captivity felt like breaking that promise. Attempting escape, even suicidally dangerous escape, felt like keeping faith with her and with himself. He'd rather die trying than live with the shame of not trying. The first reversal, discovering the uniform's impossible complexity. Bill assumed creating a convincing German uniform would be straightforward. Dye some fabric gray, add buttons, done. He was catastrophically wrong. When he began researching German uniforms using contraband photographs, illustrations from German newspapers, and observations of visiting officers, he discovered that Wehrmacht uniforms were extraordinarily specific. Exact shade of field gray, particular button placement, specific insignia for rank and unit, correct piping colors, regulation pocket positioning, even standardized stitching patterns. "This is impossible," muttered Lieutenant Frank Morrison, a former tailor from New York who'd been recruited to help. "German military uniforms are precision manufactured in factories. We're trying to replicate that with bed sheets, thread stolen from Red Cross packages, and dye made from brick dust. It's like trying to forge a Rembrandt with crayons." But Morrison was also intrigued. Although, if we approach this correctly, if we obsess over details, it might be possible. Emphasis on might. The project became an underground factory operation. Different specialists handled different components. A chemist, Captain Roger Davies, who'd taught high school chemistry before the war, experimented with dye formulas. He combined brick dust, crushed charcoal, and boot polish in various ratios until he achieved something approximating field gray. It wasn't perfect, but in low light or from distance, it passed. Buttons were carved from scrap wood by prisoners with woodworking experience, then painted with a mixture that resembled oxidized brass. The eagle insignia was hand-embroidered by a prisoner who'd worked in his family's tailoring business, each stitch placed with obsessive precision, referencing a single blurry photograph torn from a German newspaper. The most difficult component was the peaked cap. German officer caps had a distinctive shape, specific brim angle, and leather-like material. Creating one from fabric and cardboard seemed impossible, until Morrison solved it with architectural principles. "We build a frame from wire, cover it with treated fabric, and shape it using steam and pressure. It's basically hat making from scratch." The work took 3 weeks, far longer than Bill anticipated. During that time, the Soviet advance accelerated. Artillery could be heard in the distance, a low rumble that grew louder daily. Guards became more nervous. Rumors spread that the camp would be evacuated westward. Time was running out faster than the uniform was coming together. On January 18th, Morrison presented the completed uniform to Bill. "Try it on. Let's see if 3 weeks of work produces a miracle or a joke." Bill put on the uniform and looked in a salvaged mirror fragment. The transformation was uncanny and disturbing. The man looking back wasn't Captain William Blackwell, U.S. Army. It was Hauptmann Wilhelm Becker, Wehrmacht, the identity created by the camp's forgers. The psychological dislocation was immediate and profound. "I look like them," Bill said quietly. "I look like the men who captured me, the men who've kept us here, the men who might kill us." Morrison understood. "That's the point, though, isn't it? You need to think like them, move like them, be them. Method acting at the highest stakes." The camp's escape committee recruited Lieutenant James Webster, who'd been a theater director in civilian life, to coach Bill in German mannerisms. Webster had studied German guards obsessively for 2 years, noting posture, gestures, and behavioral patterns. His coaching was intense. German officers carry authority in their spine. Stand straighter. Chin up, but not aggressive. You're superior, but not threatened by your superiority. It's simply a fact. When you walk, purpose in every step. Germans don't amble. They proceed. When you speak, even in English, clip your consonants. Germans are precise with language. And critically, never apologize, never explain. German officers give orders or information. They don't justify themselves. Bill practiced for hours, walking across the compound while Webster critiqued. No, your shoulders are American, too relaxed, tighter, more tension. Germans are always slightly wound. Yes, better. Now the salute, not the American way. German salute is sharp, mechanical, less sweeping. Practice until it's muscle memory. The psychological burden was unexpected. Bill found himself adopting German mannerisms unconsciously, standing at German attention during roll call, organizing his belongings with German precision. One morning he caught himself thinking in simplified German phrases. The line between impersonation and absorption was blurring. Webster warned him, "Don't lose yourself in the character. You're not becoming German. You're performing German. There's a difference. Actors who forget that boundary go insane." "What if I need to be crazy to make this work?" Bill asked. "Then be crazy with intention," Webster replied. "Use the madness. Channel it. But remember who you actually are underneath the costume." Margaret is waiting for Bill Blackwell, not Hauptmann Becker. The invocation of his wife's name grounded Bill. He was playing a role. The role would save his life, but the role was not his identity. While Bill learned to walk like a German officer, another team constructed something equally critical: the documentation that made Hauptmann Wilhelm Becker a bureaucratic reality. In totalitarian Germany, documentation was nearly religious in importance. A man without proper papers was suspicious regardless of uniform. A man with perfect papers was legitimate, regardless of suspicion. Captain Harold "Doc" Jensen led the forgery operation. He'd been a graphic designer before the war, specializing in advertising layouts and typography. Now he applied those skills to replicating German military documents with obsessive precision. He worked with magnifying glasses salvaged from medical supplies, pens constructed from hollow bird bones filled with homemade ink, and paper carefully stolen from German administrative offices. The core document was the Soldbuch, the German soldier's paybook and identification. Every Wehrmacht soldier carried one. It contained photograph, personal details, unit assignments, medical history, and official stamps. Forging one required replicating not just the document, but the entire bureaucratic history it represented. Jensen's team stole a blank Soldbuch from a guard's locker. A months-long operation involving bribed guards, staged distractions, and extraordinary risk. With the blank document, they had a template, but filling it required creating a believable identity and history. Hauptmann Wilhelm Becker's fictional biography was constructed with novelistic detail. Born 1916 in Hamburg, educated at gymnasium, employed as a clerk before conscription in 1939, served in France and Russia, awarded Iron Cross Second Class for unspecified administrative efficiency, currently assigned to Wehrkreis Vandein, Military District 21, on administrative liaison duties, traveling between camps coordinating supplies. The backstory was deliberately boring. A bureaucrat, not a hero. Heroes attracted attention. Bureaucrats were invisible. The traveling liaison cover explained why Becker would be at Oflag 64 and why he'd leave alone. The photograph was the greatest challenge. Bill was photographed against a white wall in uniform, with the neutral expression of German military photos. The image was reproduced using a primitive photographic process, then aged with tea stains and careful creasing to look years old rather than days old. The final document, when completed, was remarkable. Jensen presented it to Bill with visible pride. "This is good enough to fool anyone who doesn't check central records. And checking central records takes weeks in German bureaucracy. By the time they could verify Hauptmann Becker doesn't exist, you'll be long gone or dead." Bill held the Soldbuch carefully. "This is beautiful work, Doc." "It's forgery at the highest level," Jensen agreed. "Now don't get caught with it." January 20th, 1945. Bill lay on his bunk the night before the escape attempt, unable to sleep. Around him, other prisoners snored, muttered, or lay awake with their own thoughts. The barracks smelled of unwashed bodies, cold wood, and desperation. Tomorrow morning, he'd either walk to freedom or die trying. Both outcomes seemed equally unreal. His bunkmate, Captain Tom Riley, whispered, "You scared?" "Terrified," Bill admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Overconfidence gets you killed." Bill pulled out a photograph of Margaret, creased, faded, carried since deployment. She was smiling at the camera, standing in their tiny apartment in Baltimore, pregnant with their first child. He'd received one letter from her since capture, dated October. She'd given birth to a daughter, Emily. Bill had a 4-month-old daughter he'd never met. "That's why you're doing this," Riley observed, seeing the photo. "Not for glory or principle, for her. And for Emily. I want to know my daughter. I want to watch her grow up. That's worth any risk." Riley was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know the statistical odds of success are basically zero, right? Even if you get out of camp, you've got to cross German territory during the collapse of the Third Reich. Desperate soldiers shoot first and ask questions later. The roads are full of refugees, retreating Wehrmacht, advancing Soviets. It's chaos out there." "I know. And you're doing it anyway." "I am. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the stupidest." Bill smiled grimly. "Probably both, but I can't just sit here waiting. Every day in this camp I feel myself dying. Not physically, but something worse. My sense of agency, my belief that I control my fate. Passive captivity is killing that. I'd rather die attempting escape than survive but lose myself." Riley extended his hand. Bill shook it. "Good luck, Bill. When you make it home, and I'm choosing to believe you will, tell people what happened here. Tell them we didn't just wait for rescue. Tell them we fought even when fighting looked insane. I promise." Bill lay back, still holding Margaret's photo. He whispered to it, "I'm coming home. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I'm coming home. Wait for me." Sleep eventually came, fitful and shallow, full of dreams where he walked through gates that opened and closed unpredictably. January 21st, 1945, 05:30 hours. Bill woke before reveille and dressed in his fake uniform in darkness, hiding it under an American overcoat until the moment came. His hands shook slightly, not from fear exactly, but from adrenaline and the weight of what he was attempting. Other prisoners who knew about the plan watched silently, offering no words because no words were adequate. The plan was timed precisely around German shift change. At 07 Naukuru, the night guard rotation ended and day rotation began, a 20-minute window of bureaucratic confusion when guards were distracted, tired, or freshly arrived and disoriented. Bill would approach the gate at 07:10 during maximum confusion, carrying a briefcase constructed from cardboard and canvas, containing fake orders authorizing his departure. At 06:45, Colonel Good pulled Bill aside. "Last chance to back out. No one will think less of you." "I'm going, sir." Good handed him something unexpected. A small American flag, no bigger than a playing card, sewn by prisoners from scraps. "Keep this somewhere on your person, under the German uniform, so you remember who you actually are." Bill tucked it into his inner pocket over his heart. The symbolism was deliberate, German on the outside, American within. He removed his overcoat. The transformation was complete. Captain William Blackwell no longer existed. Only Hauptmann Wilhelm Becker remained. He walked toward the gate with measured German precision. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed to run, hide, abandon this insanity. But his feet kept moving one step after another. The gait of a man who belonged, who had every right to be here, who was leaving on official business. At the gate, 2 guards stood at attention. Bill approached with the casual authority of an officer expecting obedience. He presented his sold book and forged travel orders to the senior guard, a corporal who looked exhausted from night duty. The corporal examined the documents. Bill's German was adequate but not fluent. He'd rehearsed exactly 3 phrases. Administrative liaison, Wehrkreisventiant. Departing per orders. Gate, please. He delivered them with clipped precision, as if speaking more would be beneath his dignity. The corporal looked at the sold book, then at Bill, then back at the documents. Time stretched. Bill could hear his own heartbeat, could feel sweat despite the freezing temperature. This was the moment. Approval or discovery, freedom or execution. The corporal stamped the papers and saluted. "Jawohl, Herr Hauptmann." The gate opened. Bill walked through the gate with controlled pace, fighting the urge to run. Behind him, the camp receded. Barbed wire, guard towers, the prison that had held him for 3 weeks. Ahead lay roughly 150 miles of German-occupied Poland between him and Soviet lines, and 200 miles to American-held territory. Either direction meant crossing a collapsing military front during winter, He'd chosen to head east toward Soviet lines. Closer distance, and the Soviets were advancing so rapidly they'd likely be encountered within days. The risk was being shot as a German officer by Soviet troops who wouldn't ask questions before firing. But it was the calculated best option among terrible choices. The first hour was the most dangerous. He walked along the main road away from camp, visible to anyone who might look back, still within range if guards realized their mistake. He maintained German posture and pace, purposeful, authoritative, unhurried. A Wehrmacht truck passed heading toward camp. Bill saluted casually. The driver returned the salute without slowing. After 2 miles, Bill left the main road and entered forest. The plan was to travel cross-country, avoiding checkpoints and patrols, navigating by compass and stolen maps. He shed the German tunic but kept the trousers and boots. The tunic was too conspicuous, but the trousers and boots were practical for winter travel. He was now in a gray zone, not obviously American, not obviously German, just a figure in mismatched military gear moving through hostile territory. The landscape was devastated. Villages showed signs of recent combat. Burned buildings, abandoned equipment, dead horses frozen in ditches. Refugees streamed westward, German civilians fleeing the Soviet advance, carrying whatever they could on carts and backs. Bill moved among them briefly, just another displaced person in a continent of displaced people. On the second night, sheltering in an abandoned barn, Bill nearly died from hypothermia. The temperature dropped below 0 Fahrenheit. His stolen rations were exhausted. He was burning calories faster than he could replace them. The cold was so intense it became hallucinatory. He imagined Margaret and Emily were with him, could hear their voices, feel their warmth. He survived by burning wood from the barn and staying awake all night, knowing that sleep in these temperatures meant death. By dawn, he was delirious but alive. He forced himself to move, knowing that movement generated heat, and staying in one place meant capture or death. January 25, 1945. 4 days after escaping, Bill was approximately 40 miles east of Oflag 64, based on his best map calculations. He'd lost 15 pounds. His feet were frostbitten. He'd been without food for 36 hours, but he was still moving, still free, still alive against all probability. That morning he heard it. Artillery fire, closer than before. Soviet artillery had a distinctive sound, different from German guns. He was approaching the front line, the most dangerous zone where 2 armies were actively killing each other, and anyone caught between them was presumed enemy by both sides. Bill made a decision that either saved his life or ended it. He constructed a white flag from a torn sheet stolen from the barn, attached it to a stick, and walked directly toward the Soviet lines with the flag held high. The alternative, trying to sneak through contested territory, seemed more likely to get him shot. He walked across an open field clearly visible, the white flag prominent. Within minutes, Soviet soldiers appeared from defensive positions, infantrymen in winter camouflage who shouted at him in Russian. Bill didn't speak Russian. He shouted back in English, "American, American prisoner, don't shoot." The Soviet soldiers approached cautiously, rifles leveled. They searched him, found his hidden American flag, his dog tags, and the remnants of his fake German uniform. The situation was ambiguous and dangerous. He looked like a German soldier trying to surrender, claimed to be an American POW, and carried both German and American items. A Soviet officer arrived, a captain who spoke broken English. Bill explained in simple phrases. American officer escaped German camp, Oflag 64, walking to Soviet lines. Not German, American. The Soviet captain was skeptical. You wear German uniform. You speak German. How I know you not spy. Bill stripped off his shirt despite the cold, revealing the scars on his back from German interrogation after initial capture, the weight loss obvious on his frame, the frostbite on his extremities. Look at me. I'm a prisoner who escaped. Please. I just want to get home to my wife and daughter. The Soviet captain studied him for a long moment, then made a decision that would determine Bill's fate. We take you to command. They decide if you American or German spy. If German, you shot. If American, he shrugged, maybe you get home. Bill spent 2 days in Soviet custody, held in a requisitioned farmhouse that served as a temporary command post. He wasn't exactly a prisoner, but he wasn't free either. He was a puzzle that Soviet intelligence officers needed to solve. Was he a genuine American POW, or a German infiltrator using an elaborate cover story? The interrogation was thorough and occasionally hostile. Soviet officers asked detailed questions about his capture, his unit, American military structure, geography of the United States, current events. They tested his English with slang and idioms. They examined his physical condition, documenting the scars and injuries consistent with combat and captivity. The breakthrough came when a Soviet officer who'd liaised with American forces in Berlin recognized Bill's 28th Infantry Division insignia and knew details about the Battle of the Bulge. Keystone Division, the officer said, using the 28th's nickname. You were at Bastogne? Nearby, Bill confirmed. My company was overrun December 19th. We held for 4 days before being captured. The Soviet officer's questions became more specific, referencing battles, commanders, and tactical situations that only someone actually present could know. Bill answered every question correctly. The officer finally nodded. You are American. Your story is true. Relief nearly buckled Bill's knees. But he wasn't safe yet. The Soviets had no easy way to return him to American lines. The front was fluid. Communication between Allied armies was poor, and Soviet forces had their own priorities. Bill was told he'd need to travel with Soviet units until they reached a position where transfer to American custody was possible. For 3 weeks, Bill moved with a Soviet rifle division advancing westward. He witnessed the final collapse of Nazi Germany from the Soviet perspective, the scorched earth, the desperate last stands, the summary executions of SS troops, the chaos of millions of refugees fleeing westward. The Soviets treated him well enough but with cautious distance. He was an ally but also a witness to things the Soviets would prefer Americans not see. In mid-February near Poznan, Bill was finally handed over to American forces at a joint Allied coordination point. The American officer who received him was astonished. You escaped from Oflag 64? That's impossible. That camp is 150 miles behind German lines. Was 150 miles behind German lines, Bill corrected. The lines have moved. He smiled, exhausted and triumphant. I walked through the front gate wearing a fake German uniform made from bedsheets. Then I walked to freedom. March 1945. Bill was repatriated to the United States, processed through military hospitals, debriefed by intelligence officers, and finally sent home. He arrived in Baltimore on a rainy afternoon, wearing a new uniform because his original had been lost, and the fake German uniform had been confiscated as evidence or souvenir by Soviet forces. Margaret met him at the train station, holding their 4-month-old daughter. The reunion was overwhelming and strange. Bill looked like himself but moved differently, carried himself with a tension that hadn't existed before. Margaret looked older, her eyes carrying the strain of months, fearing he was dead. Their first night together was awkward. Emily cried constantly, unfamiliar with her father. Bill startled at loud noises. Margaret tried to act normal but didn't know what normal was anymore. They were strangers who'd once been intimate, trying to rebuild connection across a chasm of experience. Bill told her about the escape, the fake uniform, the walk through the gate, the journey to Soviet lines. Margaret listened with growing horror. You could have died. You almost did die. Was it worth risking your life when liberation was coming anyway? Bill struggled to explain. If I'd waited passively, I would have survived physically but died psychologically. I needed to prove to myself I still had agency, that I wasn't just a victim of circumstances. The escape wasn't about geography, getting from point A to point B. It was about refusing to accept powerlessness. But you came back different, Margaret said quietly. You came back harder, colder. The man I married wouldn't have walked through enemy territory in a fake uniform. That man was cautious, sensible. This version of you is something else. She was right. Bill had changed fundamentally. Captivity and escape had stripped away parts of his pre-war self and revealed or created something more primal. A man who'd discovered he could endure extraordinary suffering and take extraordinary risks. That discovery was empowering and alienating simultaneously. I don't know if I can go back to selling insurance and living a normal life, Bill admitted. After what I've seen, what I've done, normalcy feels like a lie. How do I care about quarterly earnings when I know what humans are capable of? The atrocities and the courage. Margaret held his hand. We figure it out together. You don't have to be who you were, but you can't be only who the war made you either. We build something new. It was the beginning of a long, difficult reconciliation with peacetime existence. May 8, 1945, VE Day. The war in Europe ended. Bill stood in their Baltimore apartment, listening to celebrations in the streets, feeling strangely hollow. The war he'd risked everything to escape had ended. Oflag 64 had been liberated by Soviet forces days after his escape. The prisoners he'd left behind were free now, alive, going home. His desperate escape, viewed in retrospect, seemed unnecessary. Liberation had come anyway. But that night, Bill realized something profound. The escape had never been about timing or necessity. It had been about identity and agency. The prisoners who'd waited for liberation had been freed by external forces. They were victims saved by rescuers. Bill had freed himself. The distinction seemed subtle, but was actually fundamental. He wrote a letter to Colonel Good, who'd returned home to Texas. "Sir, I've been thinking about the escape. Other prisoners have asked me if it was worth the risk, given that liberation came so soon after. They're asking the wrong question. The escape wasn't a tactical decision based on probability analysis. It was an existential decision about who I wanted to be. A man who waits for rescue, or a man who rescues himself. Both survive, but they survive as different versions of themselves." Good's response arrived weeks later. "You're right, and that difference matters more than people realize. The war created millions of victims. We need survivors who are more than victims, who fought back, resisted, refused to be broken. You're one of those survivors. The uniform you made from bedsheets wasn't just a disguise, it was armor against powerlessness. You didn't just escape a camp. You escaped the psychological prison of captivity. That's the real freedom you won." The revelation reframed Bill's understanding of his own story. The fake uniform, the forged papers, the walk through the gate. These weren't just escape tools. They were acts of creation in the face of destruction, expressions of human ingenuity under extreme constraint, refusals to accept the identity of victim that captivity imposed. The uniform made from bedsheets became, in Bill's memory, a symbol. Humans can construct agency from nothing, can transform the materials of oppression into instruments of liberation, can walk through gates that seem impassable simply by believing themselves capable and acting accordingly. That belief, that audacious, irrational, magnificent belief, was more powerful than German guards or barbed wire. William Blackwell lived until 1998, dying at age 81 in Baltimore. He never returned to insurance sales. Instead, he became a teacher, spending 30 years educating high school students about history, critical thinking, and human resilience. His classroom contained one unusual decoration, a framed piece of bedsheet fabric, dyed gray-brown, mounted behind glass with a small placard, "German officer's uniform, 1945, fake." Students invariably asked about it. Bill would tell the story, the POW camp, the impossible escape, the walk through the gate, but he always ended the same way. The real lesson isn't about fooling German guards. It's about refusing to accept the limitations other people place on you. The Germans said escape was impossible. I disagreed. Society says certain things can't be done, certain boundaries can't be crossed, certain transformations aren't possible. Sometimes society is right. Sometimes society is wrong. The trick is having the courage to test which is which. His daughter Emily, who became a psychiatrist specializing in trauma, later wrote about her father. He carried the weight of that escape his entire life, not as a burden exactly, but as a reference point. Whenever he faced seemingly insurmountable challenges, professional setbacks, health issues, personal losses, he'd touch the framed uniform piece and say, "I walked through a German gate wearing a fake uniform made from bedsheets. Compared to that, this is manageable." The escape became his psychological foundation, proof that the impossible is just the difficult that hasn't been attempted yet. The fake uniform technique inspired other escapes during the war's final months, though none as audacious as Bill's direct walk through the main gate. After the war, military psychologists studied the escape as an example of how human ingenuity and sheer audacity could overcome sophisticated security systems. The official report concluded, security systems assume rational behavior. Captain Blackwell's escape succeeded because it was so irrational that guards didn't conceive it as possible, therefore didn't defend against it. "I made a uniform from bedsheets and walked past armed guards who could have killed me with a gesture," Bill wrote in his final journal entry days before his death. "That shouldn't have worked. It worked because I believed it would work with such totality that I convinced others to believe it too. That's the secret. Confidence and audacity can transform the impossible into the merely difficult. The uniform wasn't magic. Belief was magic." If this story makes you think about the artificial limitations you've accepted without testing, Share it, because sometimes the walls that imprison us are made of bedsheets, substantial looking but fundamentally flimsy, passable by anyone with courage to try. The gate is always locked until someone with a fake uniform walks up and asks it to open. Then sometimes impossibly it does.